Technology has often been the determinant of power at every stage of human history, and we saw that in the 19th century after the Industrial Revolution, the first wave of globalization, which led to concentration of power in the colonial, among colonial powers in Europe, and of course to the disadvantage of the rest of the world and particular colonies. We can, of course, speak a little later about the present and how it ties with the past and the whole history as it is unfolding. But to just pick up from your discourse and your wonderful exposition of the trends which are evident to everyone, let me quote a line from Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi when he spoke in Seoul in month of May 2015. He said, "Asia of rivalries will hold us back. Asia of unity will shape the century." Now, we know that Asia has, for all the rise that it is seeing, a lot of unsettled questions, unresolved disputes, and irreconciled or unreconciled memories. And some of it is playing out, yet Asia has managed to contain those conflicts. But do you think that with the position that President Trump has taken, which I can tell you later will actually, in some sense, lead to greater possibility of accommodation among Asian powers because of the lack of predictability, guarantees, or assurance of US presence, and taking into account China's rise, do you think you see the prospect of greater trust, accommodation, maybe engagement among the Asian powers, Australia, Japan, Korea, ASEAN, and India, in the face of China's rise and the ability of all of them to find a modus vivendi, if not to resolve their issues, at least to continue to manage peace and work towards a more cooperative future?
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the very generous, warm, welcoming remarks. I deeply appreciate them. I think the first point is that, in any crisis, first you have to go through the period of shock. And I think most Asian countries are genuinely shocked by these waves of tariffs that have been, generated by President Trump. Genuine shock. We can't figure out what's going on because it goes against everything that the United States has stood for consistently for almost like 80 years, since 1945. Even in the first Trump term, things were not as rough as they are today. So right now we are all bewildered. But at the same time, in the process of reflection that is going on, more and more Asian countries are coming to the realization that if you're looking for growth, clearly we can no longer hope that the American market will carry us forward. We have to generate new markets among ourselves and create new partnerships. So I give you an example, a concrete example. In Southeast Asia, the largest country is Indonesia. And Indonesia is a relatively open economy, but also relatively closed economy. But they've been negotiating with the European Union for 10, 15 years for a free trade agreement. And frankly, I would have thought the negotiations would drag on. And to my absolute surprise, President Prabowo was there a few weeks ago, and then an agreement was announced between Indonesia and the EU. Boom! I'm sure in part it was driven by the negotiations between Indonesia and EU, but also driven by a realization, hey, we have to seek new pathways of growth for ourselves. So the fact that Indonesia and the EU suddenly concluded it, boom, just like that, is an example of new new opportunities for growth that everyone is looking at. And I'm confident that in East Asia, there will be a deepening of the trade relationships. But I also hope that there will be greater, deeper relationships within East Asia and India too, in this. I'm glad you cited what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said in Seoul. But the best way to improve the relationships in Asia is to increase the trade with each other. So, I give you an example within Vietnam and Singapore. We had literally almost zero trade throughout the Cold War. But today, I don't have the exact figures. The trade figures are enormous, even between two former adversaries like Singapore and Vietnam. So, clearly, the one lesson of history is that if you want to grow, maybe you shouldn't just look at your current friends and say, I'm only going to rely on my friends to grow. You may also want to rely on your adversaries or former adversaries to grow. And at the end of the day, you ask yourself, for example, how has China grown so fast since it launched its 4 modernization programs in 1980, 45 years ago? China cleverly used the United States economy to grow its economy. So what should have been a competitor of China was used by China to grow its economy. And in fact, the Chinese used American pressure on the Chinese economy to open up their economy. And paradoxically, the reason why the Chinese economy became so competitive is because of American pressure on China to reduce trade barriers. So that's an example of having to rely not just on your friends, but also on your adversaries or former adversaries to grow your economy.
Okay, I think that's extremely well said, but let me just sum it up by saying in 2 lines. One, Professor Mahbubani, you have laid out a grand vision of Asia's rise and it having a dominant role in this century. Of course, we are also counting on the wisdom of Asians, the ancient wisdom, that they will resolve their legacy issues, settle their disputes, and manage their difference, and focus on cooperation and collaboration to realize the dream of Asian century. Let's hope that this actually is the reality going forward for all of us in Asia. So thank you all very much and a big round of applause to Professor Mahbubani.
Session on trade and investment in India-Singapore relations. We can't find a better person than Dr. Anantha Nageshwaran as a resource person here. Not only is he Chief Economic Advisor of India, but he spent the better part of the last 3 decades in Singapore, observing Singapore firsthand from close quarters. And he's very well versed in trade and economics as well. But I'm going to now start with a question from a remark made by Professor Mahbubani in the earlier session. He said, open up your economy. You have nothing to fear and the world has everything to fear. But by not doing so, the rest of the world is saying thank you to you. What do you think that India can do to open up its economy further from here, and what are the pitfalls?
No, I think I happened to catch the last few minutes of the conversation between Javed Ashraf and Mr. Kishore Mahbubani, and I think in spirit, he's right. And I think the point is India has been opening up. Majority of the sectors in the country are now open for foreign investment in the automatic route, and there is competition in multiple product areas. So India continues to open up, and even with respect to tariffs, compared to where India's MF and tariff rates were in the 1980s and the 1990s, the tariff rates have indeed come down substantially over the last 30 years or so. Of course, in recent years, as has been the case with several other countries, as you saw in one of my slides, the trade restrictions have indeed picked up everywhere in the world, because there is a challenge that countries face when faced with a competitor of huge size, which is unprecedented historically. So countries are trying to use both tariff and non-tariff measures to deal with that, and that is why trade restrictions have been on the rise in general since 2008 financial crisis, but more so in the last decade. So India has not been an outlier. India has been opening up, but I would kind of agree with him in one sense. I will reinterpret the word opening up as deregulating, which is what I said. We basically need to make sure that by deregulating, we give the agency back to the small and medium enterprises and to the entrepreneurs to raise productivity, bring down the cost of doing business, and remove the fear of growth. In that sense, there is a certain spiritual convergence between what I said and what he said. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll take you back to trade now, which is one of the main topics of discussion in today's session.
Right.
The government has been always saying that India has committed itself to several free trade agreements where the dice is loaded against the country over the years, and you're reviewing many of those trade agreements. You have a very fine example of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with Singapore, which has worked very well over the years. On the other hand, you also have an India-ASEAN FTA signed in 2009 or 10, which has not really been a happy experience for Indian exporters and Indian traders. Now, what are the learnings from the SICA with Singapore that you can carry forward to the India-ASEAN FTA?
Raghuveer, I just want to tell you, notwithstanding your very kind words of introduction, that me being a trade expert, I would have to submit that probably was an overstatement. I wouldn't consider myself a trade expert, even more so on an agreement which apparently is undergoing its own review and revision. Apparently between India and Singapore, negotiations have been going on taking a relook and reviewing the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. So it's almost like a matter that is sub judice, and it would be not very appropriate for me to speculate on it in public. So you have to forgive me for not being able to respond to that question.
Can you talk about India-ASEAN FTA?
So I think on the India-ASEAN FTA in general, I think it was concluded in a different time and context before the share of manufacturing of China, for example, grew from where it was to where it is today. And one of the important issues that many countries are grappling with, and India just happens to be one of them, is this whole issue of country of origin, etc. So I think there is room for both parties, because there are inherent, inherent reasons why both ASEAN region and India have to be engaged in a good trading relationship, because that is a growth region. It has got a reasonably young demographics compared to Northeast Asia, and India has young demographics. It is a growing region, and ASEAN, in comparison to India, is several steps ahead in the development journey. So there are some important lessons, resources, and technologies to be shared, and also inputs, etc. So I think it can be a win-win arrangement, but at the same time, it is necessary to review and repurpose the agreement in the context of the evolving global manufacturing shares and competition and rules of origin, because all countries are working towards ensuring that they're able to generate adequate jobs for their young cohort. And India, I think ASEAN countries will have to appreciate the fact that, with several hundred millions of young population for which India has to find a job, and the economic survey wrote about 8 million jobs have to be created at the minimum for the next 12 years in India, or livelihoods. So I think there has to be more sensitivity to India's enormous size, and therefore the enormous challenge that India faces, and a repurposing of the agreement and renegotiating several terms to make it contemporaneous and relevant for the current circumstances is the right way to enhance the relationship between these two vital regions within Asia.
So the first question, I think I'm going to stick around India's digital revolution, I will say. And what do you think going forward? I think Digital India, when it's launched, I remember my former chairman and founder saying, Josh, this is bigger than Make in India. And I didn't quite fathom, what he had. And in his conversation with Prime Minister Modi, he said, the Prime Minister, Digital India is truly a big deal for India. And today, 11, 12 years later, I can understand. Now, going forward on this India stack, Mr. Krishnan, what do you think are some strategic future directions which India is going to take? What do you think are some of the challenges? What do you think some of the synergies as this India stack is made available globally? What do you think are some thoughts?
I think there are 3 or 4 things which become very important. One, of course, is the applications themselves, that they are open applications on which innovators can build. And I think that is the beauty of both Aadhaar and UPI, in the sense that a lot of innovators have built models on this, have taken it, made it more applicable to more and more common people, and the outreach there has been tremendous. So clearly, this model of having digital public infrastructure which is publicly built, and in the G20 year that India sort of hosted this in 2023, I think this was a big move which was made, saying that here is an opportunity for much of the global south to actually leapfrog in terms of governance and in terms of offerings of digital public infrastructure. And that was a key moment in a sense. And the DPI movement in that sense is something which holds a lot of promise to many parts of the world. Now, clearly the challenges are 2 or 3. The first challenge basically relates to infrastructure and the availability of the kind of infrastructure you need, both in terms of connectivity and in terms of the baseload data center capacity and other capacities that you need. Investments need to take place in that area, and that is something which I think is happening. Consumer and devices, I spoke briefly about how India's revolution is mobile-led, and therefore it's much easier to access. Therefore, that is a second area that becomes important. The third area is the impact of AI and how artificial intelligence and DPIs can interplay. And that's going to be a critical area in the years to come. There are 2 ways in which the interplay happens. One clearly is in terms of the vast data pool which is available with DPIs. In the way that these transactions work and the vast data pool which becomes available. And once that is available, then the way that AI can operate on that in order to intuitively or even counterintuitively offer a range of services and other offerings based on that. So that becomes an important dimension of it. The other dimension of it truly is the way that, again, for AI, what is the infrastructure you need and how do you build the models? And more than even the models, how do you build the applications? And that requires a certain amount of talent, that requires a certain amount of reskilling to take place. And that is an important challenge as well, that the reskilling which needs to take place when that interface happens is another key challenge. And one more challenge is really on privacy and security. Privacy of data. As you're well aware, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act has been enacted and the rules have been out for public consultation. We've received fairly wide-reaching responses, and that's a process which is fairly advanced, and we should be coming out with the rules, and eventually when that is implemented to a significant extent, the privacy concerns get taken care of, but the security concerns still remain. So we in India or anywhere in the world today are not in a particularly friendly neighborhood. Data breaches and attempts at breaching this kind of data is something which people will continue to attempt, and therefore to create security frameworks to make sure that data is secure is very, very important. And I think that is a key area of investment across the world, and especially, and even in India. I think both individual attitude towards data security and cyber security has been generally lax. And more than that, even when they are maintained as central reserves, then the need to sort of establish adequate security measures becomes important. And I think both the standards of such security and the kind of applications to ensure this security need to be increasingly homegrown as well, given the hostility globally. And has to come from trusted sources. And that is where finding trusted partners is so important globally. So that's another key area. Privacy and security is a key area. And these would be, in my view, some of the key issues with regard to the rollout of the digital stack, the India stack, and digital public infrastructure in general, and the way in which it can be made more effective for larger and larger segments of population, because we need an inclusive environment. And another important element of data security or cyber security is really also awareness, and how we need to make people much more aware of the risks involved and the way that they can actually protect themselves. That goes a little beyond cyber security to cyber crime, but I think both of those are important elements as well.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnan. You've been, the session was very, very useful and important as we celebrate together with Singapore their 60 years of independence. And we hope that the collaboration with Singapore and with APAC, as Professor mentioned, continues and we grow this region together successfully. So you've been a great audience. Please, a round of applause for yourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Krishnan sir. It's always a joy. And we missed you here, but I think you definitely made up as usual digitally. Thank you, sir.